everyone. I'm Cassandra Martinez, labor market analyst here at MZ Burning Glass. Today, we are joined by senior economist Ron Hetrick and fellow labor market analyst Hannah Grieser to talk about the second report in the Demographic Drought series, Bridging the Gap in Our Labor Force. Hannah and Ron, thanks so much for joining us today. We're very excited about this new groundbreaking report. Ron, this is a follow-up to the report first released last year. Can you give us an overview of what's in this upcoming report?
Yeah, we released this report in April of last year, and at the time, things were pretty dire. People were in a lot of pain, and here we are almost a year later, and I think everybody's like, hey, the pain's not only not going away, it almost feels worse. So we wanted to kind of break down, why is that the case? Why are we still in all of this pain? And also, if we can pinpoint, what's missing, what's happening right now, I think the steps that you can take towards building solutions come out of just kind of understanding where the problem's lying. And it really does come down to two things, which we're going to talk about today. And that is just what's happening with our labor force specifically, but also with immigration.
Absolutely. Thank you. To further that, Ron, the U.S. is currently witnessing a record number of job openings to the tune of 11 million. Can you offer some insight into how we got here?
I think the biggest thing is, we try to really illustrate in the paper that we are a service economy. We have a ton of lower skilled jobs, but we're kind of running out of lower skilled workers. So why is that happening? And I think a lot of that comes from understanding the demographics of who takes those jobs in particular. So, typically younger people, first job people, those age 16 to 24. If we actually look at that population, it's actually keeps shrinking every year. It's getting smaller and smaller. And then the ones who do exist in our population are disengaged. So they're out of the labor force. So it's kind of this double whammy when it comes to our domestic population. And then what couldn't have come at a worse time, because of COVID, but also some longer term trends, immigration is a big part of filling, service level jobs, in production and light industrial. We're going to talk more about those kind of things later. But I think when you combine these things together, those are where a lot of jobs are generated, right? It's typically the non-college degree jobs. And right now we're having an explosion of them because there's just simply no one to fill them.
Absolutely. There are a couple other factors that are contributing to our current labor crisis that are covered in the report. We talk about childcare challenges and a temporary boost in personal savings. Hannah, can you expand a little bit on this?
Sure, yeah. Right now what we're seeing is that there are about 5 million people who say that they are not in the workforce, they're not in the labor force because they're caring for a child. But the child care dilemma is actually two-pronged. It has a couple of facets to it. First, child care facilities are just having a hard time, just like everybody else, to fully staff their child care centers with workers. They're struggling with the labor shortage just like everyone else is. So that is directly affecting the number of people that they can serve. And it also makes the cost of paying those workers inch upward. When there's a shortage of workers, they tend to have to pay more to bring those workers back. So that cost gets passed on to families. And so when we're analyzing those childcare costs across the nation, they're going up. We've seen 10%, 13% increase in what the listed wages are for those childcare workers just since about August. So those are rising. That's being passed on to those people that were in the workforce who had kids that were in childcare. And now if those people are in low wage jobs, what happens is that the cost of childcare basically cancels out the earnings that they would be making. And so it makes childcare really unaffordable. So now we have a lot of low wage workers, former low wage workers now on the sidelines because they've determined that they can't afford to work. But we needed to look at, how so many people also can afford not to work. We have a lot of people on the sidelines who are somehow paying the bills. And so that's raised a big question. How are there so many people on the sidelines that are able to make ends meet without being in the workforce?
Yeah, I want to talk about that in particular. Something that we do spell out in the report, but something we've been able to kind of see some more data on. What are people, how are people surviving? I'm getting this question nonstop from everyone. How are people surviving? Because we've had all of these people leave the workforce, and which is the main, crux of this new article that we're writing. We have a lot of people who are disengaged. Obviously there's a significant number of those people that are retired. 42% of people who are out of the labor force right now say they're out because they're retired. But there's still this really large number of people who are not working. And so you say, well, how are they surviving? They got to be eating, right? They've got to be doing other things. And so if you look at how, what they're using, even as of last month, even as of January, there were still a significant number of people who are using credit cards to live off of, and they're also using the stimulus checks from last year. So even think about that when the last checks were going away. We're still in January now of 2022, and yet you have 8 million people who cited those checks as a way that they were getting through. You can see this in the data, and we go into this in the article, in that when you look at personal savings, it shot up last year. Well, it's been working its way back down to equilibrium. Also, if we look at credit card debt, something we did not have in the article, you see this huge dip in it. So people use some of that money to pay down their credit card debt. But if we look at like the past 6 months, it took a big dip, and then now it's coming straight back up again. So, we're watching those savings rates, we're watching credit card debt, and we're looking at what people say they're using. Eventually, if you're using credit cards, you're going to hit your cap. So I think that's actually a good sign that we're seeing those things, because it may mean that some people are getting ready to come back to work.
Absolutely. So shifting gears a little bit, Hannah, a major concern over the last decade has been that automation is going to take over a lot of jobs and force people out of the labor force even more. Can you speak to how automation is playing a role in this and what we can expect?
Yeah, that has been an interesting shift. We've seen people going from being really fearful that we're going to have a kind of like a robot takeover, that people are going to lose their jobs because of robots. And now the attitudes are kind of changing. So we've got people kind of putting their hope in the idea that robots are going to fill these roles that are just sitting empty, these 11 million jobs, that robots are going to start to help alleviate a lot of that pain we're feeling. But I hate to rain on that parade, but I think that that's just really unlikely, and it's because technology, generally speaking, automation technology tends to create more jobs than it takes away. So World Economic Forum is estimating that by just the year 2025, I mean, that's 3 years away, that we're going to have a net increase of about 12 million jobs due to automation and robotics and things like that. So rather than taking away human jobs, it actually, the net effect is that it creates millions more jobs. And that's kind of easy to understand just anecdotally when you think about, like, even historically, like the invention of the automobile or something like that, where there were people that lost jobs as like carriage drivers with horses or something, and then it created a whole bunch of new jobs with manufacturing and design and gas stations and maintenance roles. And the same thing happens in the modern economy as well. So automating our way out of this labor shortage would require overcoming labor shortages at each stage of that automation pipeline, so to speak. We would need people in roles like coming up with the concepts for these new technologies. We need people developing and designing them. We need people on the assembly line doing the manufacturing. We need people involved in the distribution and delivery of those things, marketing, maintenance, support, tech support. And I mean, we've all seen, like, even in the grocery store, there are these automated checkouts, but we see cashiers are like number 7 on the list of most in-demand jobs right now. And that's a technology that's been fairly widely adopted. So, I mean, the long and short of it is that it's not going to be a major solution to this problem we're having. And AI and robotics is also dealing with the same supply chains that other industries are. Like the auto industry was hit with this lack of chips and semiconductors just in the past year that led to this massive slowdown in being able to deliver cars to customers. And so we're gonna keep seeing these problems as AI and robotics develop, and the need for people is just going to increase. So I would say people and not robots are really the need of the hour.
Thank you, Hannah. Ron, can you speak more to why this problem is not going to be going away? We cover a lot of this in the original Demographic Drought report, talking about birth rates and boomers exiting the labor force. Can you speak more to why this is a little bit more doom and gloom than we would hope? What kind of people can expect?
Everything requires people, as Hannah just explained, every part of the equation still requires human beings. We've actually talked about some industries, we talk about automation. So when you look at most, robotics, most automation nowadays, it's still in like auto manufacturing. It's still in like semiconductor manufacturing. That's where a lot of robotics lie. Well, if a robot or a machine kind of goes wrong, you shut down the assembly line, people go home for a couple hours. But if you're in let's say a fast food establishment that's dependent on a machine, and that machine breaks, and the nearest technician, is 150 miles away and servicing 10 other people, your restaurant's going to lose business for like an entire day or so. So you're always going to have a people backup to your technology solution. So, I think that's one of the biggest things that we have to understand is, technology is a company. It goes alongside of people, even in call centers that are automated. Eventually you opt out, which everybody tries to do, to talk to an actual human being. And I think that this is something that, we do depend on the nuance of conversation, when the nuance of need so many times when we're doing services and goods.
So birth rates are down, and as Hannah spoke to, robots we cannot expect to come and save the day anytime soon, at least. So what can we do? What kind of opportunities are being presented in the report? Hannah, can you speak to a little bit of the first point of two? One, re-engaging people on the sidelines, and then I'll shift to Ron to talk about the immigration aspect of this.
Re-engaging people on the sidelines is sort of this the great enigma right now, where everybody's trying to figure out the answer to this. And I think that really what we need to talk about is how multifaceted the solutions are going to have to be, because we've got people on the sidelines for a whole variety of reasons. We talked about childcare, but that accounts for just about, I think, 5% or so of the total. We've got people who decided to retire or retire early during the pandemic, especially a huge number of people that are in that 55 plus population that have decided, I'm done. So what will it take to encourage some of those older, more experienced workers to come back? There are a whole bunch of people on the sidelines for different reasons. And then people who maybe would like to work, but feel that they're just going to be overlooked by employers for various reasons, because they've got, an elderly relative they're caring for, or they've got a history of criminal conviction, or, there's a whole variety of things, and people in disadvantaged populations. And so it really is about addressing those unengaged people rather than just the unemployed, because we have fewer people unemployed than we have job openings. We would need 4 million additional people to fill that job openings gap. So we're going to have to work together with institutions of higher education, aligning their programs to the skills that the market needs, especially in their region, so that they can, when people come for college, they stick around and get jobs. We're going to have to work with, economic developers. Just recently, we were talking with some of my colleagues about the fact that because the talent shortage is so critical right now, we have economic developers sort of shifting their sights from, attracting businesses first to attracting people in order to attract businesses.
Yep. Agree with that one totally. Yeah, I want to actually just really quick on that. We were just talking about, if you look at this gap, and the article, if you don't read the article, please read the article, because if you look at what's happening right now, one thing that's so critical is our population has kept growing. Okay. Since February of 2020, our population has continued to grow. So I know you may have heard something different, but the population is growing, but the labor force isn't holding up. So what happens is when you have a population that's growing, your labor force isn't holding. That means more people, more population are putting more demands on an economy, more services and goods that they require. Yet our labor force isn't even back to the level that it was in February of 2020, let alone staying up to pace with the population growth. So when you look at this and you realize, look, we're the unemployed, that's not even close, because the biggest problem with unemployed is that they're part of an imperfect market, right? You have a person who's unemployed in Detroit, but the job they're perfect for is in Houston, Texas. Well, right now we have no home inventory, so people can't move anymore. So you look at this and you think it's got to be about engaging the people in your local market. And the only way you can do that is you have to go out and find those people. You have to go approach those people. They're not going to look at your job postings, all the cool and creative things that you're doing in your company. A lot of people who are disengaged aren't even going to see those things. So you have to somehow get your message to those people. And the question is, well, how do I get the message to the people? And I think, well, first thing you do is you may talk to your existing workers, ask them if they have friends, family members who aren't working, and then say, can I talk to them? I just want to have a conversation about what would it take to get people off the sidelines and back into work? Is it something that it's literally just a life event right now? Or is it something where they're looking at work as maybe it's too big of a leap for me? I don't think employers would understand my conditions. Well, give employers the chance to do it, but employers have to take the active role of finding those people. So this is the way it's got to work.
That's right.
A lot of discussions on unemployed versus unengaged. Ron, can you speak to how those are different when we are considering this? When we say tap into the unengaged population, how that differs from people who are unemployed currently?
Yeah, the way the government defines it, so it's actually pretty good. It's pretty clear cut there. If you're unemployed, it means you're actively seeking work. So you're in the labor force. And then there's people who identify as not in the labor force. So that means they are neither working nor are they looking for work. And when you look at those categories, I was describing that earlier, a lot of those people are retirees, but there's people, taking care of elderly parents or taking care of children or any of a number of other reasons. Maybe they're going to school right now, but there's just so many different reasons why somebody would not be looking for work at a certain time. The problem that we're having right now is if we go back to February of 2020 and we look at that number of not in the labor force, and then we look at where it is now, it's 5 million higher. So 5 million people who were in our labor force in February of 2020. And by the way, we had the lowest unemployment rate ever in February 2020, meaning we were employing all of these people. Now, 5 million of those people have since left the labor force. We know that the vast majority are above the age of 55. We also know that a lot of those are probably permanently retired. But there's still a sizable population underneath them in the prime age workforce and lower that is just on the sidelines. And that's the difference is an unemployed worker is looking for your job. They're looking at your postings. They're considering the possibilities. An unengaged or disengaged worker is not looking. They're on the sidelines. Maybe they're glancing at a job board every now and then, but I'd be willing to bet that the vast majority are just saying work's not for me right now. It doesn't fit into my lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. And I would say that working with people in that category and helping them understand their skills is another important factor in that. So that we were talking to somebody who's in workforce development or just yesterday who was saying, that he in the past had worked with youth and juvenile detention and people who thought they had no skills, and helping them realize they actually have a whole skill set. One young man that he worked with had been arrested for drug dealing. And he said, even that, helping this kid recognize, that you have to understand supply chain, you have to understand customer service. There are skills even in that can be transferable into a great job. And he ended up going to college and becoming a pharmacist. So there are success stories. And I think part of helping coax some of these people back into the labor force is telling our success stories when things go well, when people succeed and find a place in the labor force, making those stories public in some way and helping people picture themselves in those roles.
Yeah.
The report outlines 3 different groups of people and populations, age groups specifically, that we talk about and how to re-engage them. There was a comment as well about re-engaging people who have exited the labor force early due to early retirement. Ron, can you speak to how we can rethink the way that we approach work with that specific population and how we can possibly funnel some of those people back into the labor force?
Yeah, I can't take credit for this term, but somebody else did it. And they talked about deconstructing a job. I don't think we understand that over the course of 20, 30 years, a highly experienced person just through their own drive takes on more roles. Maybe their company had them take on more roles. And now you get to the end of this, that person leaves and you're having problems backfilling that role. And you're also like, look, this is a 40, 50, 60 hour a week job. But is it really if you were to deconstruct it down to the task that somebody's doing? And I think once you start to do that and you go, there's elements of this job that require, graphics designers, there's elements of this job that require sending communications out. Well, if you really broke that down, would you need somebody for 40 hours? Or is that 5 hours a week? And I think once you start to do that, then it's easier to re-engage. People didn't retire. And we talk about this in Demographic Drought. They're retiring with more money than we've ever known humanity to make. So they do not have to re-engage. If they re-engage, it's mostly because maybe they're interested or they want to kind of do it on their terms. So when you talk about re-engagement, you have to think about, how do I re-engage people in kind of chunks, like bits of hours at a time, without this kind of long-term, contract between a company and a worker. So I think that is going to be the biggest element to getting people who have recently retired to work longer. I don't even want to call them back in the labor force. Let's let them stay on that kind of fringe level. Let them engage how they want to engage and disengage. And I think employers have to learn how to work within that construct.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of that demographic has chosen to work for themselves as well. And I think recognizing that that's an important factor that we're seeing even over the whole population is that entrepreneurship is on the rise.
Absolutely. And speaking of entrepreneurship, how do those people who are self-employed, we saw a rise in people who were leaving their jobs to start their own businesses. How does that impact our labor force participation rate? Ron, can you speak to that?
Yeah, they actually are counted. I think there's a question always out there about, hey, if somebody works for themselves, are they out of the labor force? And some people try to use that, but that's actually not true. It's just, if you're self-incorporated, I want to make sure we understand something legally. If you're making a legal wage, if you are in it as a self-incorporated company, you are counted in the labor force. So I think that, for the most part, you talk about, a lot of people are self-employed, could be like truckers, or people who mow the lawns or a lot of things like that. So those people are counted. I think a lot of times we think gig work, we think, that creative person who works a couple hours designing something, but most of your gig workers are actually people who do, more of the services types of roles. And yes, they absolutely are counted. But, I think it's something we also want to keep our eye on, is just, as people are creating entities, and I think we talk about in the paper, a record number of people saying that they're starting businesses up. People have a lot of money coming through this, this bit that we just came through, and they're starting up their own businesses. They're going to probably be trying to hire workers too, which just kind of only intensifies that particular problem.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of questions are rolling in from the chat here. Rafael Ruiz asks, what about veterans? They held a high-skilled job, but when they get out, they might just have a high school diploma. How can the HR professional see human capital and not high school diploma, or specifically speaking to just what they have earned degree-wise?
We've talked a lot at MZ Burning Glass about the importance of down credentialing your job postings and realizing being realistic about what the job actually entails. So is this the kind of job that really requires somebody who has, 8 years of experience and a bachelor's degree in this specific field? Or are we talking about a set of skills that maybe needs a little bit of upskilling, and the person with the high school diploma could fill that job? And I think there are a lot of people who are getting this, and we're seeing a shift even in the job postings that people are doing that. They are realizing like some of these things that we list as quote unquote requirements really are just nice to haves. And I think we're going to see more employers being more successful when they're realistic about what those job requirements should be. And they're going to open up, if they're seeing like we're not getting any applicants, well, take out that BA requirement and see what you get. I think you're going to find that you're going to get some very good candidates, including people like veterans.
Absolutely. Ron, question for you. William Barry asked, how much does more money factor into this? We see the rising cost of pay. We see all these hiring now and signing bonuses and all of this that talks about compensation and all of these bonuses. How does that factor in?
Yeah, I'm actually really glad. All right. It's almost like I planted this question and I didn't, but I love this question because something, I don't know how much we explicitly say it in the new paper, but I just want to make sure something's really crystal clear here. Okay. We just went through an insane, and we are still in it, an insane growth of wages. All of those wage increases have not come with an increase in labor force participation rate. Really, what a lot of people call the great resignation, I called the great reallocation. We just took all of our workers and we scrambled up and we shook them all back out, and they just went into new jobs with much higher salaries. But all of those increases didn't solve the problem. The problem were all these people who had disengaged to the sidelines. So all of those wage increases just became higher salaries, which were passed into products, which is why we're having a lot of this inflation problem that we're having now. It's a combination of, obviously people are making a lot more, but also, as I said earlier, you have a bigger population, but we can't even get our labor force back to the level it was in 2020. So a lot of demand for a supply that we can't really generate. But I think that this is, this concept of the people that are in the labor force are making a lot more and driving a lot of these things that we're seeing happening, but really not getting any gain from it. What would have been great is if you'd have seen those wages and then watched those commensurate with this labor force participation increase, but it just simply didn't manifest.
Absolutely. A new question just came in, and I know that we've had recent conversations about this with the team at MZ Burning Glass, but Brian Austin is asking about how much of this is going to go into a long-term solution, and should we be telling people, go out, get married, start a family, and have as many children as you can? Can you speak to that, Ron?
Yeah, I'll just say, and in 16 to 20 years, if we started that tomorrow, then we'd see a benefit. This is something we talk a little bit about. I don't think this was made it into the article, but the marriage rate has absolutely plummeted the last 3 years. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you can see that graph that Hannah actually put together. The biggest predictor of future birth rates is the marriage rate. So when we look at 2020, we had the lowest birth rate we had ever experienced. A lot of people thought, well, 2021, we're going to bounce back because a lot of those concerns about hospitals not being able to take people in if there was complications in pregnancy, those were improved. Well, unfortunately, the marriage rate continued to plunge. So births for 2021 are targeting to come in lower than 2020, which was an all-time record. So all of our trends, and by the way, marriage rates in the past 2 years have absolutely fallen off a cliff, which means probably over the next several years, these numbers are probably going to continue to decline. And the biggest problem here you have is that even if we had those babies, even if we did all of those things, we're not going to feel those effects for 20 something years. And by the way, during this 20 something years, all of these boomers are departing. So by 2030, they've hit the last ones of them have hit retirement age. By 2034, we have more older people than we have young people, as pointed out in the paper. So the burden that we're seeing cannot be solved anytime soon. So the one aspect that we do talk about in the paper is immigration, because if we didn't have these people, you can only get people from two ways. Like you have them, which we didn't, or you immigrate, which we aren't doing at all. So our immigration levels have absolutely plunged as well the past several years. Here's the concern, as we kind of spell out there. Even if you start to reopen borders, and even if we massively increase the amount of immigration we have, which we desperately need to do because where we're at, you still have an issue where a lot of the countries where people are originating from have started to really pick up. One thing we point out, most of our immigrants come from Mexico, but Mexico's unemployment rate is 3.5%. It's lower than the United States right now. They need their people just as much as before, and birth rates around the globe are plummeting. So all kinds of developed nations are trying to go after immigration. But the reality is there are so many countries just simply don't have those pools like they used to have. So we just have to be really careful. We're navigating a very tricky time right now in the present. We have to get people off the sideline, or you completely open the gates and we have to get, like I say, millions more immigrants through. Otherwise, we're kind of in this holding pattern here for the near future.
Absolutely. Ron, I'm going to come back to you. So I'm going to give you a minute to think about top 3 things that employers can do right now to get through this current labor crisis and try to do the best they can to recruit workers into filling their job postings. In the meantime, while you're thinking on that, Hannah, can you speak to a couple of questions in the chat are around the gig economy and how we can leverage contract workers, freelancers, and kind of, again, continuing on that conversation with rethinking the job freedom mentality? Can you speak to a bit of that, of how we can tap into hidden talent pools by thinking more about the gig economy?
Yeah, I think there's going to be just a lot of creativity involved, people thinking in ways that we haven't done before. And when we have a lot of self-employed people doing gig work, people working part-time, I think we're going to need a lot more companies that maybe previously had somebody in-house working with somebody who's actually self-employed, doing contract work, that sort of thing. A lot of people who are on the sidelines might come back to work if more flexible work arrangements were available to them, flexible hours, being able to work from home, huge increase in remote work postings, as we know, because I think a lot of people are saying that they either would like hybrid work where they work in the office or in person part-time and work from home part of the time. There's a whole bunch of opportunities out there, and it's going to take being very creative as an employer, being very creative as an HR person who's writing these job postings, making sure that you weed out as few people as possible at the outset, make sure as many people get through to that interview. And I think you're going to find that there's a lot more opportunities than we think there are, and more opportunities to fill these jobs with people who are on the sidelines. But it's going to take some creativity.
Absolutely. And the link to the full report where we talk about how we got here and what we can do now is linked there in the chat description box. Ron, can you speak to, if you could say 3 things, what do we need to do now? Get the message out there? What can employers do to fill their job postings?
Yeah. Number 1, go after people. Stop putting signs in your windows. Stop, putting ads and things. And, I'm not dissing job boards. This is great, but you have to have a way of driving people to that posting, or you have to get that posting to people. We keep recycling the same workers. So that's not working. So we have to do something to go get those people who are kind of disengaged. The second thing that I can't suggest this high enough. This model of engaging when you want to engage, whether you want to call that the Uber model or how you do DoorDash or anything, this concept needs to take a broader kind of approach. We need to start to look at things like, how can we offer work to people in chunks? I talked about that earlier. Hey, I keep using this phraseology because I like it. People look at work like a lot of people see work as a binary decision. You're in or you're out. I either work and it's a huge commitment and it's 40 hours a week, or I just stay out. And I think people don't understand how creative employers have gotten because only existing workers see those options. So we have to do a better job of showing people who are out of the labor force how easy it is potentially to engage. So I think that would be, the second thing about it. And then, for lack of a better one, the third one is that, right now losing workers is really, really tough. When we talk about focusing on keeping people, excuse me, I'm not going to say do that at all costs. Just can't keep raising wages. In fact, I'm kind of over this at this point. What I think it does come down to is, are there things that if people were looking for flexibility, if people were looking for certain things, wouldn't have been a huge hurdle to overcome? Better to find those out when you can actually talk to people face to face than, lose them. And then you find out the people coming in have all of these demands that were maybe even more than the people that were leaving had.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Ron. And William Barry wants us to end on a little bit more of a positive note here. He asks, what positives do you see in action? He wants to give something that's a little bit more positive when he talks about the report. So do you see people doing anything encouraging, whether by location, industry? What do you see that's going well that you think should be replicated in the labor market? And Ron, that question is for you. Or Hannah, if you'd like to speak to that as well.
Hannah, if you had something ready, go for it.
Well, I see just here in the comments that one that is a positive, which is the collaboration of institutions of learning with companies and bringing employees up to speed, allowing them to pursue their degree while they're on the job, and working with those employers in order to provide the skills that are missing in the workforce, so that it's benefiting the local educators and it's benefiting the local companies and ultimately the employee themselves.
I want to say something really quick, but this is something I didn't get a chance to say when I was talking earlier. For anybody who's listening right now, if you are passionate about your company and what you all do, we have a tremendous, I call it a marketing problem in this country. So if you have success stories of employing people who are ex-offenders, or people who have a history of drug addiction, or people who have physical or mental handicaps, we got to get those messages out so that more and more people can do this kind of things. And if you are in an industry where you're kind of looking at it going, hey, this may not be the most attractive thing. Well, you're in that industry. You must have a passion about it. Get involved in your hiring process. Try to get your passion across to people. That is another thing that can help draw people to you, is just inherently in that passion that you have for your own industry. That's the last thing I want to say on.
One last question from the chat. We thought this one was really important to address because it really aligns with everything that we discussed in the report. Are you finding employers shifting to be more open to on-the-job training as a solution to losing skilled workforce? So people who are bringing them in, training them on the job. Do you see an increase of that, Ron?
Would I like to see that? Yes. not as much yet. So it's a big part of demographic drought. It's a big part of the second article of we have to shift the responsibility that used to be on the worker. Hey, come to me fully loaded with everything I've ever asked for, because guess what? There's so many of you that I can be demanding. Now we're saying to workers, open the net as wide as humanly possible, and then take that burden onto yourself. I always talk about become world-class in your training. Brag about how fast you can get somebody up and operational on a job. Bring tool sets in that allow you to do that. Just kind of digging your heels and waiting for this thing to end. I hope the papers are compelling enough to get people to understand, like, this isn't going away. Like, it can get better. Sure, it will get a little bit better. But to just go back to where we were in February 2020 means we're going right back to our lowest unemployment rate ever. So I think that's the part that I would say employers do bear responsibility. You have to go get, and then you have to train. Am I seeing a big wave of that? No, not exactly just yet.
But we'd like to see more. Thank you, Ron and Hannah. This is very insightful. The demographic drought is here to stay. Please visit our website for the full report, or you can find the link in the chat box. Thanks so much for joining us. And thanks from everyone here at MZ Burning Glass. Have a great rest of your day.